Welcome to Intersection Magazine podcast. My guest today is Metin Pekin. I met Metin through an email contact who suggested that I go through his book. He's written extensively about a new way of thinking about democracy and some of the challenges that we've faced or that the whole idea behind democracy has faced. So it's really a very interesting book. I've been privileged to meet him and to read the book. I couldn't put the book down. There's so much that he has explained about the history of democracy, about where we're going wrong and how we can rethink the whole subject of democracy for leadership, for different styles of governance that we have. He's explained where the challenges have come from and why in some sense they've been unavoidable, but he's also helping us to define how to go forward. Another hat that he wears is a business hat, so we'll talk a brief about that, but I wanted this episode to focus on his ideas around democracy and how we can reclaim this historical idea. So please introduce yourself and then talk about some of the main ideas about the book.
Certainly. Nicholas, firstly, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I live in UK. I'm a British citizen and I've been in business for last 30 years or so. And in recent years, I became disillusioned with politics, even in Western democracies, even in United Kingdom. So it's kind of pushed me in that direction. At university, many years back, I have studied political economy. I have, at an early age, I've been exposed to different systems of governance, and at the time obviously Soviet Union was still going, so we, with the fellow students, with other people, we were able to debate free markets, capitalism versus state ownership and socialist systems. So I've had a bit of a background in this, but in recent years I've become kind of a bit detached from politics because, like many people, we vote one party in and then vote another party in. So prime ministers change, presidents change, parties rotate, but end results don't change. The wars still continue, the surveillance intensifies and increases, austerity is pushed by both parties in government. So you sit back and say to yourself, there is a problem here. Something is not right, because democracy means power ultimately rests with the people. However, no matter what people oppose or demand, their will is often ignored. And we've seen this many, many times. Yeah, clear example would be Iraq War. Millions, literally millions, flooded London streets opposing the war. There wasn't sufficient evidence for the war. Or sufficient evidence of weapons of mass destruction. But everybody got together, the media, and even the, what we call in inverted commas, left-wing media, such as Guardian newspaper, they've all kind of created this narrative that there is an Iraq was imminent threat. And it really happened under the watch of Labour Party, Tony Blair. So you come to realize that, well, this is not democracy because it just blatantly ignores people's will. So we're participating in a ritual. We think we are free. We have an illusion of free choice. But in reality, we do not. And that is what's led me to look into this issue in more detail and write about it in my book called Breaking Democracy's Chains. So that's how it came about.
You wrote in your 11th chapter, where authoritarian regimes crush dissent with violence, Western democracies neutralize it with ritual. Wow, what a telling phrase. Okay, let's talk about I suppose in chapter 1 you're setting up the historical basis for democracy and where we went wrong. Can you please highlight for this a little bit for the audience in terms of, for example, where the Americans came from and how some of the founding fathers were trying to warn future generations about where the challenges would emerge?
Yes, certainly. A good point that. Obviously, it's worth noting that democracy predates political parties. Political parties came around not out of philosophical genius. They came about as a necessity. Now, when I've read the Federalist Papers written by American founding fathers, what was striking is that they warned against factions almost unanimously. They were saying ambitious, unprincipled men through political parties, through factions, will subvert the will of the people. The reason they feared factions was because they have seen it, what they did in Europe, what they did in England, what they left behind. So they wanted a fiercely democratic system where power lies with the people. But they grappled with that issue,
Okay.
but had no choice to kind of join the parties themselves at that era. And the reason for that, if you like, a natural role of parties was because of the low information era. There was no television, there was no radio, I believe. The press was not that common, you know, the leaflet or pamphlets that had to be printed. We certainly did not have internet. There was no information, wasn't readily available. And on top of that, if we kind of think in those days from that day's perspective, education was very low. People were not educated. So coupled with lack of technology and information, with the lack of education, parties had naturally arisen out of factions organizing to give public cues to function the democracy. But today we are very, very different to that era. Information is widely available. We have internet, we have newspapers, we have media, although it's captured. We will have to come back to that one. But communication is instant. Parties are no longer needed to fulfill that role. Hence, you start questioning these. I think this day and age, we need to seriously debate whether parties are needed for the functioning of democracy. Because all our lives, at school, you know, at elections, every platform, we are almost told political parties are, you know, integral part of democracy. But that is not true. So we need to put aside assumptions and what we are being told and look at democracy and say, how can we make it true to its origin, where the power should rest with the people, not with the leaders, not with the parties. So they were accidental. Parties were accidental in history, not their design.
That's, I think, for the readers who will be purchasing the book, that's chapter 3, where you talk about debunking the myth of party necessity. So in that chapter, you mentioned about, I think, about 12 different ideas that have been used to make us believe in the necessity of the party system. So I'll just highlight maybe like 3 of them, and then you can maybe expand a little bit on those. The efficiency illusion, the illusion of choice, and then the accountability mirage. So maybe just highlight a little bit on the efficiency illusion.
Sure. See, one of the things that we've been constantly told is that parties provide this structure and they make things efficient and they give voters the cues so that you're either left wing or a right wing. By just knowing the party, you vote for those parties, and they organize people, they bring people out for voting, and the list kind of goes on. The defenders of the political parties would go down that route. But reality tells a different story. In reality, what you have is that if you look at United States, if you look at Great Britain, there is hardly any difference between the left or a right-wing parties. In America, you have Republicans and Democrats. In UK, we have Conservatives and the Labour Party, 2 dominant parties. And when it comes to wars, they're exactly the same. When it comes to austerity, they're exactly the same. When it comes to surveillance, it's exactly the same. When it comes looking after the billionaires, corporations, special interest groups, they're exactly the same. There's hardly any difference between them. The difference is between cultural fault lines. Every country, every nation, every civilization, every population will naturally have differences. Those differences will be religious. In Christianity, they will have, I don't know, Catholics, Protestants. In Islam, they'll have different sects, Shiites and Sunnis. We will have different views on immigration. We'll have different views on abortion, you name it. Whatever the cultural differences are, we'll have different views on Palestine, other wars, and what have you. So what parties do, they are not efficient. They basically polarize through the fault lines, through the natural fault lines, and they basically paint other side as being existential threat. So in America especially, if you look at it, the Democrats sees Republicans as existential threat, and the other way around. They will say, well, if the Democrats came in, we'll lose this, we'll lose the other, we'll be invaded by the Mexicans, and so on and so forth. And if the Democrats will paint Trump as, well, we're going to lose democracy, he's going to become a dictator, and so on and so forth. So that motivates the base. So the efficiency illusion is a fallacy. They tell us that it's efficient, but they're not, because in my book, I do explain how democratically we can organize people, how we can have a position. And it's worth also inserting here that political parties only motivates people to vote through fear, because it's almost tactical voting. They say, come out in your droves to vote to keep other side out. And despite that, people have lost faith in parties, and the voter turnout is going down year by year, election by election. And consequently, in some countries now, they're putting mandatory voting in. But that brings us nicely on to the next point you've raised, which is the illusion of choice. So even if you make mandatory for people to come out and vote, what are you voting for? What are we voting for? So we have, the choice is this. We have two main political parties that rotate in power. Nobody else really gets in. That's across most of the democracies. Yes, there is some countries where they have coalitions, but predominantly there is a couple of two parties or so that dominate the voting bloc, and that's left or right. Republicans or Democrats kind of a thing. So when we go to the the polling station, before we cast our vote, the menu is curated. The choice is filtered. We only get to vote for the people, for the representatives that have been chosen by the political parties. So because those choices are not real choices, because at the end of the day, these guys owe their careers to the political parties. And that's why in United States you will see that the re-election rate of the senators and representatives is 95% plus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, they know, the representatives know they owe their career to the parties and party bosses, and indirectly people who finance the corporations and interest groups that finance political parties are filtering those candidates. So before we go to the ballot box, the choice is already filtered.
Yes, pretty much.
So we only get an illusion of choice. We don't have a real choice, because it's like going to a restaurant and they say to you, okay, you've got a choice, but it's only a fish restaurant. You've got fish. If you want chicken or vegetarian or lamb, you haven't got it. That's what we get. That's the choice you have. But the problem doesn't end there, because that leads us on to the accountability.
Yes.
Well, the accountability element of this is that representatives should be accountable to the voters.
Yes.
Because we as voters voted that representative to go and represent us in the parliament, in the House of Representatives. The problem is the party bosses tell them how to vote. We had it, perfect example would be here in United Kingdom. When Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister, he won 21 veteran MPs, representatives, were not happy with Brexit. They voted against government. The whip system tells them to vote with the government, but they have decided to vote against it. So what Boris Johnson did is basically withdrew the whip from them and more or less ended their career. So they could no longer get party label. Yes, they could go independent, but people are used to voting for party label, so more or less ended their careers. So accountability is not to the people under the current system, it is to the party bosses and their financiers. And that is not democracy. So that's why the defenders of party really have no leg to stand on any of the points they put forward, that parties are necessary or good, because parties are neither necessary nor good for democracy.
I think in your book you called it the centralization of blame without delivering justice.
Correct. Yes, so let me explain that point in a little bit more detail. Let's say you voted for your representative, and that representative has promised you that he was going to support the local community and reduce taxes. But when he's in the when he votes completely in opposite direction, he doesn't support locally, he votes for the higher taxes and what have you. Now you come to the next election, who's responsible? He'll say, well, the whole party machine is responsible. As an individual, you cannot hold them responsible, because voting, as we've said, the choice is filtered. You either vote for that same party, which means the same guy or a girl, or opposition party. So if you're a left-leaning democratic person, you continue voting for your guy even if he's betraying you, because the alternative is even worse. You're voting the other side on, and if you're on the right, you don't want people in the left to come in. So that's why it's diluted in that accountability side of things.
Okay. Now, in terms of, you mentioned some of the things that strengthen or that have managed to make the parties so powerful, the powers that control the parties. Could you shed a little bit more light on those? You talked about lobby groups, think tanks. Then you mentioned the revolving doors that allow politicians that were part of the system to get jobs that would further entrench them into the system. So I wanted to get a little bit more highlights in terms of what the power behind the party.
Sure. Now, important point. That is an important point. Okay, so party machine is almost like a business, because you need people and people need to be paid. They need money. And raising money is a key part of modern democracies, because without raising funds, raising donations, you can't really get elected. And party machines have these networks to raise big funds. In America, that goes into billions. You know, Adelson's, Donald Trump, when he was in Israel, he stated that Miriam Adelson had been to see him more often than anybody else in White House, and they have donated 300 plus million into Donald Trump's campaign. So what we know is that political parties are institutions that need finance, and that finance comes from the billionaire class, from the, whether it's industry, corporations, special interest groups, you know, fossil fuels, big pharma, you name it. So what these people do, they don't just tell the party bosses to filter the candidates and only have people who are aligned with their views to ascend inside the party to get anywhere near the power, and filter out anybody that's not in agreement with them or going to cause them problems. They also have big networks into think tanks. So what they do, they finance these so-called independent think tanks who draw up legislation. So before the representatives come to vote on a legislation, that legislation is being drawn up by the think tanks. And the agenda is set by the media, because media is owned by the same centers, same billionaire class, vast majority of it. So the situation you have is that you have filtering, you have think tanks that write the policy, you have the party machine that tells the representatives how to vote, and then also they have lobbying. There is a big lobbying going on in all democracies, but extremely powerful in United States, that they lobby these people in power. They're already their own guys. They're not strangers. They've been ascended with the blessing of the billionaire class. So what happens? What happens is that they have the system captured from all directions. And what they do is that to bypass the laws, corruption laws, they have this revolving door phenomenon. Like the German chancellor giving contract to Russian Gazprom, and then when he retired, he was employed as a non-executive director with the Russian Gazprom. Tony Blair now goes around and make millions and millions. So the revolving door is the final icing on the cake that these politicians know they're going to be in power for 4 years, 8 years. And after that, they're going to line their pockets if they deliver favors to these corporations and these financiers. So the whole system is messed up.
It is. For your chapter 4 and 5, I see a bit of a blend, because in chapter 4 you talked about that the parties are at the heart of violence and insecurity. And then in chapter 5, I think you were describing how the machinery works. You mentioned before about fear, and I think what you said is fear mobilizes better than hope. So can you shed a bit of light in terms of how the system works, especially you mentioned weaponization of issues and then mega identities. Can you kind of shed a little bit of light about how that works?
Yeah. There is this American journalist, researcher called Liliana Mason. She has got a great book called Uncivil Agreement. Now, what she says is that in her research, she concludes that parties have fused political views with the cultural beliefs and created this mega identity. Now, parties have every incentive to motivate through fear, because nothing works better than fear. If I say to you, well, look, if the opposite party gets in, you're going to lose your freedom. We're going to be swamped. We're going to be overridden, or this is going to happen. We're going to lose democracy. So that fear motivates voters to come and vote and create loyalty to their party, because each side sees other side as existential threat, and that's done through parties and their partisan media. So for years and years we have been told left and right, but really there isn't much between them, because who finances both Labour and Conservative parties are almost same centres, same billionaire class. You know, in UK we have the Rupert Murdoch that owns 60% of the media, and both parties are in bed with him. So that's really the crux of that problem. Fear does motivate people better than the hope, and none of them really offer any hope. They just say we're better than the other side.
Okay. For the machinery, you go on in chapter 6, talk about the Trojan democracy, and then you give the example of Egypt, Ukraine, Pakistan, Libya, and I suppose Russia. And then in chapter 7, you talked about the fourth estate and how the media, in a sense, has been captured. The audience or the readers will appreciate the depth of the material that you've put together for us. You've talked about justice in chapter 8. You elaborated how the media has been seized, policy has been manipulated, the use of regulation to stifle media. So readers will appreciate, as I said, the depth of the work that you've done. I suppose as a person in business, what are some of the suggestions that you have for people who want to help change the system? I know you spoke about the importance of non-partisan pursuits or the independent, and some of the other issues you mentioned in terms of a solution. So what I wanted is give us a glimpse into what the solution looks like, and then your personal perspectives in terms of, like, for example, me as a business person, how do I do business better in the light of what I have just learned about what I need to change with the democratic system? How does this affect me as a business person?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, it's worth looking at the little bit in more detail in Trojan Horse chapter. Now, what we mean by that is that the perfect example for that will be regime changes. Since Second World War, United States have changed probably 50 regimes across the globe, directly or indirectly through CIA or covertly, or sometimes directly. Now, the latest example of that was in Ukraine. Yanukovych was elected and he was pro-Russian rather than being pro-European. And famously, there is a American lady, senator, whatever, the special responsible person for Ukraine called Victoria Nuland. famously distributed cookies to the crowds, facilitated uprising. There was a lot of money spent in there to undermine the system, and then got current president elected. So through the party system, they have basically found their way into this party through money, through whatever it is, and got this system in place and basically got their guys elected. It happened in Pakistan because Imran Khan was standing up to America to an extent, and before long he found himself by other parties supported by United States out of power and in jail on some corruption charges. So no matter what you call it, parties not only have problems at home, they have problems, or they cause problems. They're perfect host, not just for the money inside the borders, but also for the foreign powers. So the foreign powers, imperial powers, can through parties, if you like, implement their guys. Now, this is why where there is no parties and there is authoritarian regimes, like we had in Syria, because they could not support an opposition party and bring them in like they did Ukraine. It goes to the open war, overthrowing somebody, supporting the Islamist terrorists in what, because the guy that's currently president in Syria, he was one of the most wanted men on CIA list. There was a reward on his head, the Jolani guy. Whereas now he's the president of Syria, and Trump openly says that he has put him there. So that Trojan horse, where there is parties, it basically enables imperial powers to support their own, through money, through media, their own ideologies and their people who are close to them, who's going to look after their interests. They install these parties, and where there's no parties, they resort to violence and wars and regime changes, which is much more difficult and much more expensive. Now, in terms of the fourth estate being in chains, I think that's an important point, because it's called fourth estate for a reason, because the role of media is to hold power to account. So when there is corruption, the media is supposed to expose it, so that on the next general election, these people can be voted out, or the judiciary can take necessary action to punish these people. But the media in the Western world, unlike the authoritarian regimes which directly threaten and appoint their own guys and run it directly and jail independent journalists, in Western democracies what we have is a softer approach. They have passed legislations to prevent legislation against monopolizing the media. So the media concentration comes about. It is in just a few billionaire hands, in the rich hands, which is part of the same elite club. And they also suffocate small independent media by not giving them advertisement, by lawsuits and bankrupting those people. So they've got the media under control, but through soft means. And now, instead of being the watchdog, the media has been turned into a bit of a lapdog. It barks when the owner says bark, and it bites the poor and the truth seekers rather than the people who commit crimes and corruption in government, in power. So that's what we mean in that. And in judiciary, it's a similar sort of a story, because even if you look at the American system, Donald Trump has appointed judges to the Supreme Court that are Republican-leaning, Republican-thinking. So it's become politicized. But not only that, they use media as a tool. We have it in Russia. For instance, there was that opposition leader that got killed in prison, and he was poisoned and so on and so forth, directly kind of using media. In other countries, we have opposition leaders locked up because they are a threat to the power. So some are doing it subtly, others are doing more openly. So media is being used and captured through this system as well. Now, going on to the other point you were mentioning about no party system, what is being proposed in the book, partyless system. Now, in this system, what we are looking at is not some military guy taking over and banning parties. It is completely different to this. So what happens is we start off at local elections, and anybody can start in any constituency of 180 or whatever the 200 constituencies you have for MPs or representatives. And to be a serious candidate, you will collect a certain number of signatures from the voters. And that can be done transparently on a government website where people can go and support Nicholas or somebody else and say, well, I support this person. And if you hit that 0.5% threshold, you become a serious contender. And then through that, then once you become a serious contender, there will be some state funding and equal media access for you to get your message to the public, to the voters, to say what you're going to do for them. So once all the independents are elected, the 180, 200, depending on what country you're in UK we have 650. These people are in the parliament, and then these elected representatives working on behalf of the voters will decide which two finalists will go to general election to become the leader of the country, to become the president or the prime minister. So through initially anybody who wants to become a presidential candidate will get signatures from representatives, and if they hit a level, a serious level, then they will become a serious candidate. And through rounds of debating in the parliament and then voting by the representatives, they narrow the list down. So the ones with the lowest votes drop out, and then through a series of other debates, we end up with two finalists as candidates to become the president. In a general election, these two people will then go out to the voters in a general election, and then the winning candidate becomes the president, the runner-up becomes the opposition leader. So now you will have constitutionally and with a public mandate two offices, executive and also the opposition, mandated by the people. They will set up their own cabinet and also shadow cabinet to scrutinize the government, to the workings of the government, to put alternative policies, to explain to the independent representatives what a policy means, so that independent representatives can vote for each policy. So the association forms around each policy. If you and I were representatives on one issue, we might vote for the same issue yes. On the next one, you might vote yes, but I might vote no. So I will form alliances with other group of representatives. So the policies will only become law if they got popular support. So that provides that structure, it provides competition, it provides scrutiny, and it provides accountability, because the representatives are then accountable to their voters. And representatives, if representatives are not happy with their representative, next round of general election, they will vote them out and vote somebody else in. So that is the system that's being proposed here, and it is infinitely more democratic. So it does away with the cultural division, does away with accountability, it does away with ignoring people's will. It reflects the society, basically. That is the system. Does that cover all your questions you've put to me?
I think the readers might appreciate the case study, which I think you mentioned Nigel Farage. Could you mention what he did?
Yes. Yes. So what we've got here, I mean, Nigel Farage's example is that we are kind of, especially in the United States, voters are told you only have a two choice really. You have Democratic Party or Republican Party. In UK it was always Labour and Conservatives and little bit of Liberal, maybe one or two MPs. Green Party or Liberals from time to time. They came into coalition once. But Nigel Farage had proven that people are issue driven. Because on Brexit vote, he has mobilised the people to say we should not be under the European law. We should be sovereign. And he mobilised a lot of voters. That led to the Brexit referendum. Because the Conservative Party at the time, under David Cameron, was losing so much vote. And to put a stop to it, he has taken the risk to go to referendum, and sure enough, people voted to exit European Union. The Brexit did happen then. So now Nigel Farage does the similar sort of a thing on immigration. He's got Reform UK. He's distorting the politics again. But again, my proposal is no party system, independent representatives. What Nigel Farage is doing, he's also being financed by a billionaire that lives abroad, and they have an agenda to fulfill.
Okay.
So that is not looking after the best interest of the people. But the point there is that people will drift away from these main parties if they see real solution. We just need to get the message out to the people and say to people that your vote matters. Your vote either changes the system, this broken system, or it legitimizes this broken system. Because what do these leaders say? We've got popular vote. People voted for us. But nobody questions the circumstances. Nobody questions the choice that voters have. That is the problem.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad I got the chance to read the book. Now, readers want to know, where can they get the book? How can they get in touch with you for more information or for interaction?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, I have presence online on all the platforms, so I can communicate with anybody on those platforms. The book is available across Amazon in US, in UK, and I'm guessing everywhere else. Audiobook, same. The book is also available in America, in US, Barnes and Noble's bookstores and other bookstores. In United Kingdom, it's Waterstones. These are the biggest bookstores in these countries, and other good quality bookshops have it as well. So it's widely available.
Please don't forget to mention the name of the book. I think we dove in without mentioning the name of the book.
You're 100% right. Breaking Democracy's Chains.
Okay.
It's not breaking democracy, it's the breaking the chains, because, yeah, it is being captured by the entrenched elite, the billionaire faction, the billionaire class. Democracy needs to be freed, and power needs to return to people.
Okay, Mr. Pekin, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this amazing book. Definitely a life changer. I recommend it to all my listeners and everybody else out there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you.